Hey, welcome to the Texas Legislative Update. I'm David Blackman. I'm here with Jason Modglin, the president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm good, David. It's really good and excited to be wrapping up the regular session here in a couple days.
Yeah, I bet you are. We This is our 18th episode. It's the week ended May 26th. We only got 3 days remaining in this session after today. With Sine Die midnight Monday. And I guess it will be open whether we do that at midnight Austin time or midnight El Paso time, but maybe they won't have that much business left. Anyway, this has been an incredibly busy week, obviously, as most all of them have been in this session. I guess the first big item is we appear to have a deal on a budget for the next 2 years, and it's a big budget, $321 billion with an allocation for a big cut in property taxes. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's kind of two big budget items this week. There's the regular budget, the forward look 2 year cycle, and then they also do a supplemental budget, which looks at the existing funds, how they've been allocated over the previous 18 months, and then how they're going to spend them up until September 1 of this year.
Yeah.
And that's got a big chunk of change in it, as you can imagine. So property tax relief, absolutely. You know, the governor opened up the session demanding that of the budget surplus, which at the time Comptroller Hager put at $32.7 billion, that he wanted to see over half dedicated to property tax relief. And that's really the top line number. What I always get the question is, where did the money go? Where did the $32.7 billion go? And keep that $32.7 billion in mind. $17.6 billion is appropriated for property tax relief over the next 2 years. So in 2024 and 2025, hopefully, all these planes land, we'll see a pretty good considerable compression of our school tax rate, saving everybody, homeowners, businesses, large and small capital investment in this state, a pretty good amount of money on your property tax bill. It remains to be seen what they do on top of that, whether it's the Senate plan, which really focuses more on homestead exemptions, or the House plan, which focuses on appraisals. But 17.6 billion, well over half of that budget surplus, is dedicated to property tax relief. Then I've got kind of three other big buckets of where the money went. The first being to kind of state employee pay and pensions, and that totals to about $11.5 billion. They shored up some holes in the state employee system, pension system, nearly $2 billion there. Gave state employees pay raises, which is approximately $2 billion. All of us and some of us with loved ones have home health care workers and things of that nature. That's actually a budget item you might not realize, but it relates to Medicaid funding. And so nearly $2 billion there to increase pay for those folks. Law enforcement, retired teachers kind of round out the rest of the money at nearly $6 billion. So that's that big program. The next big bucket is about $10.5 billion in new spending for infrastructure funding. And certainly we've advocated for that, $5 billion for dispatchable electricity generation loan program, which is very good. A number of ports and ship channel improvements, that totals nearly $1 billion. A lot of water funding. We've talked about Senator Perry's effort on the Texas Water Fund, but they also did quite a bit on flood mitigation, addressing some water systems. So that's a positive improvement.
Yeah.
I'd say the other kind of tack-ons to that, broadband development was a pretty considerable dollar amount, and parks. They put $1 billion towards new parks in the state, and then on top of that, they did 125 million to go buy Lake Fairfield there from a power company up there. So retaining the 99 parks in the state and hoping to add on to that. And then the last big bucket, I totaled at approximately $7.4 billion is for universities. You have nearly half of that to create a new PUF fund. PUF being the university lands and things of that nature that fund the Texas system and the A&M system. They've created a $3 billion endowment for all of the other systems, Texas Tech, Texas State, and some of those other systems in the state, University of Houston. They put nearly over $1 billion to school safety, public school systems, a pretty considerable amount for capital needs for other types of universities. And then a lot of these kind of newer areas for the state to get into: semiconductors, emerging tech, space commission, and a chip design laboratory at Texas A&M. So a lot of money. When we started this conversation, we were talking about $32.7 billion in budget
I think
surplus.
we're well past that number, aren't we?
If you were adding that up, you get well over $47 billion. So some of that is into the Ford budget. I can't imagine we will ever see a session like this amount of money, and how they pushed it out the door.
Holy cow. Well, I mean, it's kind of, when you take each one of those items, right, with all those big dollar amounts attached to them, kind of hard to argue against any of them, frankly. And but then when you get to that total,
you look at the aggregate.
Yeah, you kind of wonder how the Texas Tribune reports that they've reached this budget deal, and there's a lot of unallocated money left over from the surplus. And I'm not really sure how that headline was generated, but anyway, we'll see how it all works out. Next big item, of course, we've talked about repeatedly, the grid reliability issues, and you touched on it a minute ago with the $5 billion low interest loan fund. The three bills that we've ended up with here are Senate Bill 2627, SJR 93, which is the enabler for 2627, and then Senate Bill 7, and all three were passed by the House early in the week. Where does it all sit in the Senate now?
Well, it went to the Senate, and they refused to concur with the House on the House amendments, and so it'll go to a conference committee. But I highly recommend, David, if you want some great entertainment, it's only 10 minutes long, is to go watch Chairman Todd Hunter's layout of Senate Bill 7. It was one for the books in a session of first and unprecedented items. This was quite the layout. He talked mostly about this fight between large industrial customers and electric generators, and really the challenge that the Public Utility Commission has had, that the legislature has had, and advocates on both sides, for the lack of information, the lack of a clear conversation about what is needed by electric generators to put more steel in the ground, to build more dispatchable generation in this state. What do they need?
Yeah, it's
And
amazing how reluctant they are to just lay that out, right? Spell
we,
it
we've
out, folks.
we've had a lot of difficulty in that, and even the Public Utility Commission came up with this concept of cone, cost of new entry, and that has been a very difficult number to quantify and really understand. And so the House initially had a $500 million budget cap on that, to say the Public Utility Commission could not authorize more than a $500 million for the performance credit mechanism. I think they wisely said that's too low, and they went up to $1 billion. And yet the generators said that that's still too low, and not 1.5 or 2 gets us there. It just said it's got to be removed. It's got to
Yeah.
be completely done away with. And so that was a big source of his frustration. Was you gotta come to the table. You got to meet with me. You got to meet with my committee, and you got to come work the legislature and tell us what you need. And I think ultimately that would have helped pretty considerably. But it is worth 10 minutes of your time to go back and watch his layouts of Senate Bill 7. And he got a super majority of votes on that, nearly 120 votes.
Good for him. And I think we ought to make it clear, this is not a new problem. Okay. This lack of information from the generators. And I'm just going to be blunt about it. This is a decade-long problem. And them not being willing to come to the table with real quantified direct information. They're always talking around this issue. And I think at some point we have to conclude that the generators in our state just don't want to build any more thermal capacity, because it's not the politically correct thing to do. And that's just my opinion, and I'll shut up about it now. But good for Chairman Hunter for calling.
And whether it's kind of the PC or it's how they're making their money is chasing after some of these federal production credits and things of that nature. But spell that out. I mean, if that's the dollars and cents of it, I think you've got 181 pretty smart legislators that can say, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out a way to get there and still get you producing electrons for the state. So that was just amazing to watch and see. I was sitting in the gallery watching it, still can't believe it. I mean, he talked about Domino's delivery charges. He talked about sugar daddy. I mean, he had some quips that will live on in infamy for a very long time. So it was quite a scene.
That's awesome. All right, next issue. Let's see. Oh, one thing I've noticed that the media in the state is publishing articles this week talking about how the state, because they've fixing to approve those bills that kind of incentivize new thermal capacity, are moving away from renewables. Is that really what's happening here? I don't see that happening here. I don't think that's what's happening here at all. Do you?
No, I don't think we're dismantling anything, and in fact, we're going to be the global leader in solar here probably by the end of the year.
We're already the global leader in wind.
In wind, that's absolutely right. One bit of note, we've talked about a couple times, Senator Colkhorst bill, is it 724 or 624?
624, yeah.
I'm jumbling them all up. 624 was added, not in its entirety, but most of it was added to the Public Utility Commission sunset bill, which is now back in the House. So that will be a new layer of regulation on top of zero regulation right now, which I've always thought kind of makes it a more mature industry if you've actually got a regulator that you're working with and making sure taking care of some of your issues. So no, I think it's hyperbole for sure to say we're turning away or we're disregarding as Chairman Peter Lake said, this summer we're going to be highly dependent upon the wind blowing and the sun shining.
Sure are.
And if it's not, we're going to have a lot of hand fans and things of that nature to get through this summer.
Yeah.
So, renewable energy, I don't like to use that term. Wind and solar are kind of a key part of our energy mix. We're not dismantling or turning away from that. There is a strong desire by everybody, Republicans and Democrats, to have a way to shore up those generating resources when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow,
Yeah.
or we have a very hot day or a very cold day.
Or a
Those
major winter
items
storm. Yeah.
do not perform during that time. And so what are you going to do? Either you're going to tell people to shut off, and we've done that, and that can be extremely harmful and deadly, or you're going to have some kind of backup. And yes, batteries are emerging, but batteries are a way to capitalize on people flipping on the lights in the morning and in the afternoon. It does not save you in any shape or form, because it goes for 15 minutes, maybe an hour, and then you don't have a battery anymore. So
Right. It's not a solution. It's not a real
it's not a
solution. It's a
solution. Yeah,
band-aid.
that's right. That's right. Well, it's great.
We'll-
It's a great way to make a lot of money. I mean,
Oh,
that is
sure
when
is.
prices are very high. And if you can get cheap wind energy, sometimes they're paying you to take it. And then you can resell that at peak prices for 15 minutes at a time. What a deal.
Hell of a deal.
You know,
Section 313 replacement bill, House Bill 5 passed the Senate. Is it going to a conference? I'm not clear. We're going to be in
I
a
don't know
conference
if
on
it's
that bill?
going to a conference. As we were talking about before the call, I think you take the burden in the hand. The House has repeatedly voted to either extend these types of large capital investment abatements, and they've been stalled in the Senate for lots of reasons. There wasn't enough transparency in the program. There wasn't enough teeth if companies don't perform. And they've made some pretty considerable reforms over the years to the previous program, and they've adopted those same levels of reform into this program. But Senator Swertner worked extremely hard to get 31 senators onto this bill. He wasn't successful in getting them all. I think there were 4 no votes in the Senate, but that is still a phenomenal job. It looks very different than how it came out of the House. But I think there's a high priority for this bill, both from the governor and from House leadership. And so I would suspect they adopt it, and we get 2 years down the road and see what it looks like. Is it performing? Are we able to compete with our neighbors, particularly Louisiana, on attracting large capital investment? It's a little bit broader than certainly it left the committee. You'll recall as it left the House, it was largely just large capital projects. It did have an exclusion for wind and solar, but still fairly broad in terms of what type of project could benefit from it. The committee in the Senate dramatically limited what it would be for. It was really only for electricity generation, still excluding wind and solar, but fairly limited in its application for what it could be used for. As he brought it to the Senate floor, He reduced the abatement, so you can't abate 100% of the project. You abate a lesser portion of the project, and added a number of new items that potentially could be eligible. And one in particular is the development of natural resources, and not a lot of direction on what that would be limited to. But certainly, as as we've talked about, one of the biggest is oil and gas, but also a lot of other mining
Yeah,
opportunities in the state. Uranium. We
even
still
lithium
produce a
out in the
lot of
western
lithium
part.
and lignite
Yeah.
in the state. So there's there's the potential that this really could be a phenomenal program for the state to attract that level of capital investment, close some of these projects, and land those big project announcements in the state. And I kind of think the House accepts it, and we move on down the road. So that's my guess. That'll play out sometime this weekend.
Well, I think one thing, just one item of clarification, when we talk about wind and solar projects being excluded from this particular incentive, the reason you exclude them from this particular incentive is because they already qualify for the investment tax credits and other incentives that were passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, those projects that don't apply to these other projects that the state is trying to incent. So, I mean, that's not the state turning away from wind and solar. It's just recognizing that these things are already heavily subsidized and there's no reason to include them in House Bill 5. Anyway,
That's right. That's
I
right.
just think it's something that needs to be clarified.
There's also, I mean, a big portion of this is trying to compete with other states,
Yeah,
and wind and solar. Sometimes this is a criticism of oil and gas too. Is you are locked into a particular area. That's where you get the most sunshine. That's where you get the most wind, and so there is kind of a fundamental why, if that is where they need to go, would we abate that capital investment
right.
entirely, because they can't just up and go to Louisiana. Louisiana doesn't have the wind or the sun to make that an attractive capital investment, and so that's a lot of the concern from members. It's a little different with refineries. Pipeline is cheap enough. You can run that into Louisiana. You can run that into Mexico, assuming the State
Yeah.
Department signs off. And so that pipe is fairly cheap. And when you're talking about tens of billions of dollars in steel and jobs, it's phenomenal that we have that in Beaumont as opposed to Shreveport. And so good that they did that. Good that they're moving forward, and I suspect the House accepts it.
Of course, the big elephant in the living room this week in Austin is this decision by the House Ethics Committee to recommend 20 articles of impeachment against the Attorney General Ken Paxton right at the end of the session here. It sure seems like a weird time for all this to be coming to a head. I don't know what you want to say about it, but I figured we should at least mention
It's very weird. It's certainly unprecedented in a session of unprecedented items. I mean, maybe we'll share this at some point, but I mean, I thought this week, let me just put together a top 10 of the most amazing things I saw that I never thought I would see. And it started to turn into just a weekly, it kept topping itself. And I got to like 35 items and I'm still adding on to it. And now they're happening on an hourly basis as opposed to a weekly basis. I mean, it's just
maybe that can be the topic for our next episode.
yeah.
The session wrap up. Yeah.
So it just bizarre, bizarre, I think is the best way to describe everything. Yes, the House had 20 articles of impeachment. It's unclear to the degree to which there will be much of a trial in the House. Certainly, there will be a big debate in the House to try to gather more information on the investigators and why they're recommending these certain articles. What was some of the backstory? What was some of the evidence? What were some of the transcripts? The transcripts have now been filed with House members so that they can read those as well. And then whether the House decides to move forward or not is really separate and apart from sine die on Monday. The impeachment process is not limited by them being in session. And so they could extend, certainly in the House, to dispense with this recommendation from this committee. And then it would go to the Senate, and the Senate, that is where the trial would occur, and certainly take testimony and hear counter arguments and evidence on other side. So it we haven't seen this since 1919. Paul Ferguson.
Paul Ferguson. Oh yeah, who could ever forget Paul?
So there was an impeachment of a Galveston County judge in the 70s, but I mean no one has seen anything like this because it hasn't happened in over 100 years. Similar to a House member being expelled, that happened 50 years ago, and that happened this session too. So
what are you gonna do?
A session for the record books. It started with that $32 billion surplus, and it's only managed to top itself each week. So yes, quite a bit will occur over the weekend. We'll see what occurs. Obviously, a Memorial Day as well, where we really have to give thanks to our men and women in the military that have died serving this country. So just a wild end to really a record legislative session.
One final item, just right quick. On Thursday, we had a very crucial decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Sackett v. EPA case that has been rumbling around our legal system for 17 years, since 2006. In the waters of the United States, it's a proposed regulation, or actually a regulation that was finalized by EPA in January. And just thought we should mention that and talk about why that is an important decision by the Supreme Court.
Well, first, let's start with it being a unanimous decision. I mean,
astonishing.
Astonishing.
Yeah.
That alone should blow away in this attack from the president that this was dismantling of the EPA. I mean, you had all 9 justices, including Ketanji Brown, that he nominated, saying that EPA continues to overreach in this area.
Yeah.
And really establish a bright line of a little bit of a different take on the navigable waters to really say there has to be a connection, a constant connection between waters that find themselves within the United States and the actual definition in the Clean Water Act of waters of the U.S. And how the protections of the Clean Water Act extend to waters that actually are involved in interstate commerce, that cross multiple states or interact with multiple states. So, as long as I've been in state government, they've been talking about this provision. Certainly, the Bush administration, tried to work on it pretty extensively with farmers and ranchers and the oil and gas industry to try to come up with a solution. President Obama's administration blew that out of the water, and that really started this back and forth between litigants, and ultimately this Sackett case really established a clear line, and hopefully the legislature, not the legislature, Congress, should they ever want to revisit this, are actually going to have to do some legislating. They're going to have to open up the Clean Water Act and define WOTUS differently. But this is really just a phenomenal marker. I mean, this ruling on top of the West Virginia case earlier in the year, maybe even last year. I'm trying to remember when
was
that was.
Late last year.
To really say you can't just allow for this bureaucratic overreach and creep that happens on a decade-long basis, to where we can't even unwind where we were, because we've added on so many different layers on top of it. And so really a phenomenal job by the Supreme Court, all 9 justices. I think that's really a testament to coming together and having that ruling. I know there was some some justices that didn't want to go as far, but ultimately that they came to the decision to roll this back. So that's phenomenal.
Yeah. And for those who are not familiar with the case, which will be most viewers, the Sackett case involved landowners who had purchased a piece of land. They were going to build a house on it. Towards the bottom back part of the acreage, there were a couple of areas where you had a sporadically occurring marshy pond kind of area that would fill with water during rainy seasons and then drain during the summers. And EPA came in and wanted to deny them the use of that land entirely, declared a wetlands under the navigable waters provision in the Clean Water Act. Declare that a navigable body of water, which is patently absurd on its face, but it took 17 years and tens of millions of dollars in legal fees to finally get to a Supreme Court that would resolve that issue with some clarity. So it's just a huge decision that has eaten up an awful lot of time and energy at the EPA and in the court system for a long, long time. Just a big deal, a really big deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So next week we'll be back with a session recap, and we can let you do your top 35 things you never thought you'd see in a legislative session. And the session,
well, I have to clean it up. Some of it's not for family
no profanity.
audiences.
This is a family show. This is
that's right. Program. That's right. But no, that'd be good. The point to the budget, hopefully landing here this weekend. Some of these electricity items, really phenomenal. The on the energy side, the oil and gas side, we'll be able to point to some geothermal items, some hydrogen. Not really enough on carbon capture. I think that'll be something they revisit in 2 years. And looking at some of these upstream issues that we urge them to take up, but we'll push them again in 2 years. So it'll be nice to wrap up next week.
And some of these things, it's better to wait, right? I mean, like on the carbon capture, which, I was for that legislation, obviously, but you may take another look at it in 2 years and realize we're not having the big problems that we thought we might have. And in that case, the legislature doesn't really need to act. But anyway, yeah, we didn't get everything done that we hoped the legislature would do, but overall, assuming these last big things get done, it'd be end up a pretty productive session of the Texas legislature.
That's right. That's right.
And you know what? Having dealt with all this stuff for 25 years, it seems like almost every time we get to the end of the session and realize it's been a pretty productive session. And that's a real testament to our system here in Texas. And it's something we're very lucky to have and not have these people in Austin legislating year round every year. Right. So
Yeah.
we'd be living in an entirely different place if that was the case.
We absolutely would. Yeah, I don't think even when they tease thinking about that, I think they quickly
Yeah.
realize that would be a bad thing to do. So
Not a good thing to do.
yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you, Jason, as always. I hope you have some semblance of a weekend, although I suspect you'll probably be at the Capitol most of the time. And
I'm going to be at the Capitol most of the time, and then we jump right in. I mean, while most of the state agencies are closed, federal agencies closed on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday start right into interim projects.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Rule 8. Rule 8's coming. So I think we'll have some news in June on that front. So we'll have lots of conversations about that over at the Railroad Commission starting here pretty quick.
Awesome. Things never end.
It never ends. That's right.
All right, man. Well, have a great weekend, and thank you to all of our viewers. Our audience has grown every week, and it's gotten to be such an extent we may have to consider continuing this in some kind
There you go.
shape or form as the years or the months go on. Anyway, thanks everyone. We will see you next week.